Well, believe it or not, I still haven't watched the Apollo Defectives version of the program that I took part in. I won't call it a debate because that's not what it was, really, was it? It was me coming up with a lot of facts that anybody could check, and them coming up with an absolute load of rubbish, and everything I checked that they told me was proved to be wrong. Like Douglas Arnold wasn't the managing director of Kodak. You know, they didn't use an ordinary film. They used a special film. And they said the Russians couldn't truck their spacecraft to the moon. Of course they can, or they could back then in the 60s. And I actually did a video showing, you know, the land-based and ocean-based tracking systems that they use. They had tracking ships. Everything they say, if you research it, is wrong. It's rubbish. And I think you'll find that everything I said, if you research it, will be correct and provable. Now, I just had a quick look at this, and I haven't watched much of it, but just to kick off, this is just gives you an idea of how detached from reality this guy is. He says that basically he doesn't doubt people have been to the moon, which is something new, I think, because they're normally harping on about the deadly Van Allen radiation belts that nobody can fly through. Impossible for humans to travel through the Van Allen radiation belts. Now he's saying people have been to the moon. They probably went there. It's probably the Germans. They probably went there in the 40s. Now, in his mind, anybody other than the Apollo missions and the Apollo astronauts could have gone to the moon. Now, there's overwhelming evidence that the Apollo missions took place, and the Apollo astronauts went to the moon and walked on the moon. There is zero evidence for the Germans going to the moon and walking around on the moon, unless he's going to put forward something like Iron Sky, the movie, as a documentary. And the other thing that I thought was absolutely hilarious, and Marcus Allen and these clowns will say this all the time, and that is that you know that the Russians would know they faked it, but they would keep that. They would keep that secret. Just think about that for a minute. Now, the price for that, I think, if the first Apollo moon landing was faked, I think the price for that, for the Russians keeping that quiet, would have been that the next moon landing would have been Russian. So as soon as the Apollo 11 astronauts stepped back on the aircraft carrier on Earth, the fake Russian moon landing would have been taking place. And then the other fake American moon landings would have been taking place after that. So it would give the impression that the Russians were just pipped at the post. Also, it's completely and utterly ludicrous. You know, the Russians wouldn't keep a secret like that. Marcus Allen said, "Oh, actually, before I get onto that, these guys are really funny." Actually, it's a bit dark in here, but I did make some notes that I can't now read, which is not very smart, is it? Okay, so can you just imagine the Russians? Sorry about the camera work. The Russians holding that secret. Okay, so they're going to say, well, they would have said, well, you know, how many regime changes has there been? Of course, you know, it's not even the same country anymore, is it? If you go into Vietnam, to try and suppress the communists, we're going to tell everybody you faked the moon landing. The Americans went into Vietnam, didn't they? That would be a good bit of leverage there. You might think that the Russians might bring to bear. That's how ludicrous this is. And then the Russians, of course, went into Afghanistan, and the Americans were backing Bin Laden and the Mujahideen to kick the Russians out of Afghanistan way back when. I can't remember when that was. So the Russians would have said, "Look, you know, if you keep supporting, we want to move into Afghanistan. If you keep supporting the fighters there that are shooting all our helicopters down and killing all our troops, then we're going to tell everybody you faked the moon landing." Can you see how ludicrous this is? And then you've got Kuwait. You know, if you go into Kuwait, if you go and kick Saddam out of Kuwait, you know, we'll tell the world that you faked the moon landing. If you go into Iraq and get Saddam, we'll you know, you leave Saddam alone, or we'll tell the world that you faked the moon landing. And you know, the last one, the cherry on top, of course, is, you know, if you go into Afghanistan, we're gonna tell everybody you faked the moon landing. I mean, how ridiculous is that, really? Absolutely bloody ridiculous. And I saw afterwards that what was it? They were doing a bit of damage control. The defectives here, Marcus Allen and Scott Henderson. You know, the guy that denies the existence of communication satellites. Marcus Allen was saying, he said, "Oh yeah, I said that you know, NASA had published all the radiation doses for all the Apollo astronauts," and Marcus Allen said, "No, they haven't." And of course they have, and I did a video to show that, and they did a video of sort of damage control afterwards, in which and they actually showed the figures. And Marcus Allen said, "Oh yeah, well they would have got this kind of radiation dose in low Earth orbit." Now, for a start, Marcus Allen would have absolutely no idea what sort of radiation dose astronauts might get in low Earth orbit. You know, he wouldn't have a clue. Secondly, how many other nations would have been able to track it? To track them and say, you know, these guys never left Earth orbit. Lots of countries would have been able to track them and say they never left Earth orbit. How many people would have been able to see it with the naked eye if all they were doing were orbiting? You know, how many radio hams would have been tracking them? And they go out in the back garden and say, "Okay, well that's it there. It should be coming over the horizon right now on this bearing," and there it would be. You know, you can see satellites going over. They'd be considerably smaller than the Apollo spacecraft. You can see them with the naked eye. You know, these people just talk absolute bloody rubbish, and they rely on people that, you know, that have absolutely no idea about any of this stuff to lap up their rubbish. As I said, everything they say is you can check it, and it's completely and utterly false. It's just complete and utter nonsense. Anyway, this I thought was pretty funny.
That's, yeah, I'm not sticking my fingers in the ears, I'm sticking earphones in my ears, and I'm not, and my mouth is covered by a microphone, so I'm not sweeping it aside and doing those things. Alan did change his position. It'd be nice if he actually addressed his own direct. Okay, let's have a look. Hang on. If this is not a new point, I'm skipping over it. BIS member Marcus, you said right at the beginning, you said, "I do not doubt that man has landed on the moon." Is that correct? Marcus, there's more than enough evidence that I'm persuaded by, specifically as I say, the photographs from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter which show the land as where they're supposed to be. Yeah, I mean, I'm not certain about that. Jara White has done a video about how those could have been fake. But anyway, I checked the Apollo photographs overhead.
Well, you could do a video about anything being faked, couldn't you? You know, you could say that the Queen's coronation in 1952 was all faked. You know, you could say anything's faked. Proving it's faked is something very different, and he won't be able to do that because it wasn't.
Compared to the LRO photographs of the same mission, the patterns of the crater matches, the positions matches. The only thing
And there are other pictures, of course, from spacecraft belonging to other nations. So, you know, that's all fake too. Is, you know, China and India, they're all in on the act as well, are they? You see how ludicrous this is.
I object to is there such poor quality photographs. There is a body of thought which does believe that nobody went to the moon. I don't happen to agree with it. That's a quote from...
Yeah, that is a quote from Marcus Allen. That's exactly what he said, and I've actually got a video on my channel of him saying that in those words.
Marcus, and Jin said precisely what is consistent about Allen's position as a commentator known for not accepting manned landings, while briefly and on camera affirming them to be a renowned group of PhDs. All right, I'm going to say this one last time. Jen, and now what I know, and then you even give me a new point, or I'm going to drop this. He says there's more than enough evidence, as he said from the LRO photos, that somebody landed on the moon. And I actually agree with that.
He's sounding a lot like Patrick Moore there, isn't he? So he agrees with that. Somebody landed on the moon. So all this nonsense about the Van Allen radiation belts being lethal, you know, people can't fly through the Van Allen belts, that's all nonsense, isn't it? So they've changed their perspective on that, have they?
I think there is evidence that people have landed on the moon.
Of course there is. there's evidence that the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon. There's overwhelming evidence that the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon.
It doesn't actually just come from the LRO, it comes from other sources as well. In fact, I believe probably more people have been to the moon than we've been told. Many more, probably many.
Why could it be anything other than what actually happened? Have you noticed with these conspiracy people, this guy in particular, you know, he'll fight tooth and nail. Everything is completely different. It's all arse about face. You know, many more people than the Apollo astronauts have been to the moon, but there's no evidence for that, is there? We don't see any engineering. All the engineering specifications, all the communications logs, all the medical logs, all the Apollo missions, we don't see that for anything else, do we? We don't see the Germans doing that. We don't see the Russians doing that. We don't see any of that from anybody, any other source, do we?
Many times as many astronauts as we've been told. And also I think the exploration of the moon probably began much earlier than we've been told, probably in the 1940s, I would say.
Yeah. See how completely detached from reality this guy is. Started in the 1940s when the best they could do was a V2. You know, he's got no idea. I think he sits in these little his little subterranean bedsit there, and he just sits there filling his head with all this rubbish off the internet all day and every day. He goes out and does a bit of dog walking, does a bit of shopping for a couple of OAPs, and the rest of the day is spent reading things like Nexus magazine. That might as well be the Beano. And filling his head with all this absolute bloody rubbish off the internet, all this conspiracy claptrap.
So I agree with him on that, and whether we could differ on who went, and I think probably Germans were the first people to go. Might disagree.
Okay. So next time there's one of these Apollo defectives type things, you know, maybe someone should get on there and ask them. You know, if you're so sure that all these other people have been to the moon, anyone other than the Apollo guys, they would have had to fly through the Van Allen radiation belts, wouldn't they? In particular, ask Jarrah why he would sign up for a mission to fly through those radiation belts, if it's all so deadly and it's impossible for humans to travel through them. Anyway, just a quick video, this one. I don't really have time to watch all this nonsense now. I tend to sort of listen to it rather than watch it when I'm doing other stuff. I'm sort of just fixing one of the bathrooms up at the moment. I was actually listening to something else today while I was doing that, so I only noticed this a little while ago, and I pressed play and he went straight into this, so I thought, okay, I'll just do a very quick video on this. As I say, I still haven't watched the Apollo thing that I was on to see what they've done with that, but I'm sure I can counter whatever they've said without any difficulty, because whatever they say is complete and utter rubbish. It always is. And it's very easy to verify that it's complete and utter rubbish. All right, I think that will do. Just a quickie. If you've struggled through this video all the way to here, jolly well done. Thanks for watching, and maybe I'll catch you again.